A Study in Scarlett, Part 2, Chapter 1 continued. And you too. I'll tell her how awful good you've been. I'll bet she meets us at the door of heaven with a big pitcher of water and a lot of buckwheat cakes, hot and toasted on both sides, like Bob and me was fond of. How long will it be first? I don't know, not very long. The man's eyes were fixed upon the northern horizon. In the blue vault of the heaven there had appeared three little specks which increased in size every moment, so rapidly did they approach. They speedily resolved themselves into three large brown birds which circled over the heads of the two wanderers and then settled upon some rocks which overlooked them. They were buzzards, the vultures of the west, whose coming is the forerunner of death. Cocks and hens! Cried the little girl gleefully, pointing at their ill-omened forms and clapping her hands to make them rise. Say, did God make this country? Of course he did, said her companion, rather startled by this unexpected question. He made the country down in Illinois and he made the Missouri. The little girl continued, I guess somebody else made the country in these parts. It's not nearly so well done. They forgot the water and they forgot the trees. What would you think of offering up prayer? The man asked diffidently. It ain't night yet, she answered. It doesn't matter. It ain't quite regular, but he won't mind that, you bet. You say over them once that you used to say every night in the wagon when we was on the plains. Why don't you say some yourself? The child asked with wondering eyes. I disremember them, he answered. I haven't said none since I was half the height of that gun. I guess it's never too late. You say them out, and I'll stand by and come in on the choruses. Then you'll need to kneel down, and me too, she said, laying the shawl out for that purpose. You've got to put your hands up like this, it makes you feel kind of good. It was a strange sight, had there been anything but the buzzards to see it. Side by side, on the narrow shawl, knelt the two wanderers, the little prattling child and the reckless, hardened adventurer. Her chubby face and his haggard, angular visage were both turned up to the cloudless heaven in heartfelt entreaty to that dread being with whom they were face to face, while the two voices, the one thin and clear, the other deep and harsh, united in the entreaty for mercy and forgiveness. The prayer finished, they resumed their seat in the shadow of the boulder until the child fell asleep, nestling upon the broad breast of her protector. He watched over her slumber for some time, but nature proved to be too strong for him. For 3 days and 3 nights he had allowed himself neither rest nor repose. Slowly the eyelids drooped over the tired eyes and the head sunk lower and lower upon the breast until the man's grizzled beard was mixed with the golden tresses of his companion, and both slept the same deep and dreamless slumber. Had the wanderer remained awake for another half an hour, a strange sight would have met his eyes. Far away, on the extreme verge of the alkali plain, there rose up a little spray of dust, very slight at first and hardly to be distinguished from the mists of the distance, but gradually growing higher and broader until it formed a solid, well-defined cloud. This cloud continued to increase in size until it became evident that it could only be raised by a great multitude of moving creatures. In more fertile spots, the observer would have come up to the conclusion that one of these herds of bisons which graze upon the prairie land was approaching him. This was obviously impossible in these arid wilds. As the whirl of dust grew nearer to the solitary bluff upon which the two castaways were reposing, the canvas-covered tilts of wagons and the figure of armed horsemen began to show up through the haze, and the apparition revealed itself as being a great caravan upon its journey for the west. But what a caravan! When the head of it had reached the base of the mountains, the rear was not yet visible on the horizon. Right across the enormous plain stretched the straggling array, wagons and carts, men on horseback and men on foot. innumerable women who staggered along under burdens, and children who toddled beside the wagons or peeped out from under the white coverings. This was evidently no ordinary party of immigrants, but rather some nomad people who had been compelled from stress of circumstances to seek themselves a new country. There rose through the clear air a confused clattering and rumbling from this great mass of humanity, with the creaking of wheels and neighing of horses. Loud as it was not sufficient to rouse the two tired wayfarers above them. At the head of the column there rode a score of more of grave iron-faced men, clad in sombre homespun garments and armed with rifles. On reaching the base of the bluff they halted and held a short council amongst themselves. "The wells are to the right, my brothers," said one, a hard-lipped, clean-shaven man with grizzly hair. "To the right of the Sierra Blanco, so we shall reach the Rio Grande," said another. "Fear not for water," cried a third. "He who could draw it from the rocks will not now abandon his chosen people." "Amen, amen," responded the whole party. They were about to resume their journey when one of the youngest and the keenest eyed uttered an exclamation and pointed up at the rugged crag above them. From its summit there fluttered a little wisp of pink, showing up hard and bright against the grey rocks behind. At the side there was a general reighing up of horses and unslaying of guns, while fresh horsemen came galloping up to reinforce the vanguard. The word "Redskins" was on every lip. "There can't be any number of Inuits here," said an elderly man who appeared to be in command. "We have passed the Pawnees, and there are no other tribes until we cross the great mountains. Shall I go forward and see, Brother Strangerson?" asked one of the band. And I," cried a dozen voices. "Leave your horses below, and we will await you here," the elder answered. In a moment the young fellows had dismounted, fastened their horses, and were ascending the precipitous slope which led up to the object which had excited their curiosity. They advanced rapidly and noiselessly with the confidence and dexterity of practiced scouts. The watchers from the plain below could see them flit from rock to rock until their figures stood out against the skyline. The young man who had first given the alarm was leading them. Suddenly his followers saw him throwing up his hands as though overcome with astonishment, and on joining him they were affected in the same way by the sight which met their eyes. On the little plateau which crowded the barren hill, there stood a single giant boulder, and against this boulder there lay a tall man, long-bearded and hard-featured, but of an excessive thinness. His placid face and regular breathing showed that he was fast asleep. Beside him lay a little child, with her round white arms encircling his brown sinewy neck, and her golden-haired head resting upon the breast of his velveteen tunic. Her rosy lips were parted, showing the regular line of snow-white teeth within, and a playful smile played over her infantile features. Her plump little white legs, terminating in white socks and neat shoes with shining buckles, offered a strange contrast to the long, shriveled members of her companion. On the ledge of the rock above this strange couple there stood three solemn buzzards who, at the sight of the newcomers, uttered raucous screams of disappointment and flapped sullenly away. The cries of the foul birds awoke the two sleepers, who stared about them in bewilderment. The man staggered to his feet and looked down upon the plain which had been so desolate when sleep had overtaken him, and which was now traversed by this enormous body of men and beasts.